Hello everybody, and welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary. Today we're going to be talking about the 12-year-old single malt Japanese whiskey called the Yamazaki. Now, I've never talked about a Japanese whiskey before on this channel, so let me give you the rundown. Basically, you're going to see a lot of things similar between a Japanese whiskey and a Scotch. And part of that reason is, the number one reason really is that they import their barley from Scotland. Aside from that, they have very similar ways that they make their whiskey, so they twice distill it. And then, as most whiskeys are, it's aged in white oak, although sometimes they'll do a sherry cask. Japan also will use Japanese oak. One cool thing about Japan is that it's got a similar climate to, say, Kentucky or Tennessee. Now, this means that it's got hot summers, cold winters, and that extreme change in the temperature lends itself to the maturation process. Basically, it means it's going to mature faster than a place like Scotland or Ireland. In 1923, Shinjiro Tori built the first commercial distillery in Japan in the Vale of Yamazaki. This area had great access to water, and it was a bit humid, so when anybody is presented with such a beautiful area, they do as any of us should do, and went and made alcohol. In the 1920s, in a small village in Japan, when a building came up that had a steady stream of barley going into it day and night, and nothing was coming out but smoke, rumors arose. The villagers speculated that there was a monster in the building named Usuki that ate barley. What was really happening was a lot of experimentation. Peat was scorched black, they would run out of barley and have to stop the distilling process, they were banging their copper stills into different shapes, trying different ratios, all kinds of stuff. All of that experimentation was a great idea, as Yamazaki now exports to over 10 different countries, and they're responsible for the largest market share of whiskey in Japan. It's worth noting that America actually imports the most from Yamazaki at about 60% of what they produce. Now, Yamazaki isn't unlike most other companies where they, have their whiskey aged in different kinds of barrels to different age ranges. And outside of the white oak, you're going to get sherry casks and puncheons. Aside from that, you're going to have their ages. You got the 12-year, which is their most common seller. You've got the 18-year. You have 25. And outside of the US, you also have a 35-year and a 50-year. So, at long last, let's get into the whiskey. Now, this is an 86 proof whiskey, which is pretty standard as far as alcohol content goes. Now, the first thing you might notice about this particular whiskey is the color. I would say it's about the color of kind of like a light black tea. Another thing you notice is this is actually a twist-off, which I know I've mentioned in previous episodes is always a little weird to see with a whiskey, but does not mean anything bad. It's just people associate corks with something better. Aside from that, you might be able to see that this bottle has this little bow right at the top here. Now, if you were to go look at their pot stills, they actually have a little bow right in the copper. Looks just like this. So I think that's kind of cool. Let's go ahead and pour a glass, and we'll get to the nosing and the tasting. So on the nose, you're going to start seeing why this is associated with Scotch a lot. This has got a very, very citrusy light smell. You've got some oak in there. Actually, believe it or not, it's kind of like a shoe leather, which is a very distinctive smell. I've smelled it in other whiskeys before, but not very often. That's kind of cool. All right, so there's one more thing that I pick up in there, but I don't want to talk about it until after you get to take a sip. So if you've got this, by all means pour some, have some with me. Cheers. Man, that's a great whiskey. It's just so good. All right, take one more sip if you want. Outside of that, the thing that I taste the most in here is pear. And that's such a weird thing to taste in a whiskey. So usually you'll get citrus, you might get some apple from like a bourbon or something, or just cherry from Scotch. But rarely do you ever taste pear. And in this case, between the pear and I'm sure you're getting some of the spice from the barley and just the oak that you taste and everything, those three flavors, they just go together so perfectly for me. And obviously some other people, because this whiskey has won a lot of awards. In fact, this whiskey is about $100. I've seen it anywhere from 140 down to 70 actually, but usually you can find it for about 104, which is a weird number, but I've seen it for that several times. So it's obviously expensive. Makes a great present though, because a lot of people have never tried a Japanese whiskey, and if you have a whiskey lover in your life or yourself, this is a great present to get. You know, $100, whatever, it's a lot of money, but most good whiskeys, or great whiskeys I should say, cost around that much. So I would say this is perfectly priced, if not slightly a bargain. All right, so that about does it for this episode. If you enjoyed this and want to see more like it, please subscribe to the channel. Outside of that, you can find the social media links in the description below. I'm on the Facebook page a lot, actually. There's a decent amount of activity on there and I respond pretty quickly, but shout out to Rafa. Outside of that, remember to drink responsibly, and by that I mean don't drink and drive, but more importantly, don't waste a drop. I'll see you next time on the Whiskey Dictionary.